The rain had been falling for hours, soft at first, then turning into a steady hiss that blanketed the quiet town of Ridgeton. It was close to midnight when 27-year-old Lily Morrow left the corner cafe, umbrella folded under her arm, phone glowing in her hand as she typed a final message to her sister, home in 10. It would be the last message she ever sent. The street cameras later showed her crossing the dim crosswalk, her face partially illuminated by passing headlights, then stepping into the fog-soaked parking lot where she had left her car. After that, she vanished. No screams, no struggle captured by any camera, just a woman walking into the darkness and never coming out the other side. For the police, the first few hours were confusion wrapped in uncertainty, as all missing person cases begin. But there was one silent witness they didn't know they had yet: Lily's cell phone, an electronic heartbeat pulsing through radio towers, silently recording everywhere she had been and everywhere her killer would take her. By morning, Ridgeton police had set up a temporary command center. Officers canvassed the cafe, the street, the parking lot. The rain had washed away nearly everything: footprints, tire tracks, traces of any physical evidence. It was as if the night had conspired with the killer, scrubbing the ground clean. Lily's car was still in the parking lot, doors locked, keys missing. Inside the vehicle, nothing. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no fingerprints worth lifting. A ghost crime scene, the kind detectives fear most. Her family arrived, frantic and confused, holding on to hope with trembling hands. But there was something else, something cold and unsettling. Her phone was no longer ringing. It wasn't going to voicemail. It simply stopped responding. A dead connection. Every modern investigator knows what that means. Phones rarely die by accident. People might disappear, but signals almost never stop without intervention. To detectives, the absence of a signal is a signal. The lead detective, Marcus Hale, was a former cybercrime specialist forced into homicide work after budget cuts. He understood the modern truth of investigation. People lie, but their data doesn't. He summoned the digital forensics unit and issued a simple order: find her phone. With a warrant in hand, the team contacted Lily's carrier. That request triggered the single most revealing document in the case, the CSLI dump, or cell site location information, a map of where Lily's phone had been, tower by tower, second by second. And as they opened the data file, a strange pattern emerged. Lily's phone didn't go straight home, as her message promised. Instead, it had traveled east toward the industrial district, a place where no one walked at night, a place where the city's abandoned warehouses sat like old bones beneath the highway. Then the phone abruptly stopped transmitting at 12:14 a.m., a sudden, unnatural death of a signal, occurring miles from her intended route. That alone was enough to send officers racing to the last known coordinates. The area was a graveyard of forgotten industry, rows of rusted metal siding and shattered windows, graffiti peeling like old scabs. The rain pooled into dark puddles that reflected the flashing police lights. As they scoured the site, officers found nothing: no body, no signs of a struggle, but something felt wrong. No reason for Lily to be here. No friends, no job, no family connections. Just an empty, echoing place where only criminals and stray dogs wandered after midnight. A sense of dread crept through Hale as he stared at the dark window frames. If Lily had been brought here, she wasn't brought alive. But the absence of physical evidence meant they needed something else. Something digital, something invisible. And they had just the tool. Cell towers operate like the skeletal framework of modern life, constantly tracking phones through triangulation, estimating their position based on signal strength to nearby towers. Lily's coordinates were imprecise, a 600-foot radius of possibility. But Hale knew that modern phones talk to more than just towers. They whisper to Wi-Fi routers, ping GPS satellites, negotiate Bluetooth handshakes, and store microdata that carriers retain as part of routine operations. He requested everything: tower dumps, historical CSLI, handset GPS logs, and handshake data, a rarely used but incredibly powerful data set of signals exchanged between phones and nearby wireless networks. even networks the phone did not connect to. If Lily's phone had passed anywhere near a building with a live router, there would be a dot, a timestamp, a clue. And there it was. Not discovered by a detective, but by an analyst barely out of college. A single line buried deep within the logs. Lily's phone had brushed against an unsecured router at 12:05 a.m., a warehouse office. The MAC address was registered to a small logistics company that had gone bankrupt the year before. It had no employees, no shipments, no security patrols, just a property manager who stopped by once a month. "We searched that warehouse again," Hale ordered, "every inch." Officers returned, this time with forensic luminol, thermal scanners, and cadaver dogs. For hours they combed the structure, until finally one of the dogs alerted near a rusted floor drain. As the luminol sprayed across the concrete, faint blue glows emerged, the unmistakable constellation of blood, washed and wiped, but never truly gone. The case shifted instantly from missing person to homicide, but without a suspect, the digital trail was the only witness left. And then a new clue arrived, one that tightened Hale's stomach. Another phone had been near Lily's in the final minutes. Not a coincidence, not at that hour nor at that location. The tower log showed a device, unidentified, prepaid, unregistered, dancing in tandem with Lily's movements. Wherever she went, it went. When her signal died, that phone's signal kept moving, tracing a path out of the district and into a residential neighborhood miles away. A neighborhood with no cameras and narrow streets where the houses sat close together like watchful silhouettes. That unknown phone was the key. If they could follow it, they could find Lily's killer. But prepaid phones or burners are notoriously hard to trace. No identity, no billing address, no name. Yet even burner phones have weaknesses. They leave tower footprints. They leak location metadata. They connect to cell sites that form a pattern unique to their users' habits, home, workplace, daily routines. And, most importantly, they sometimes touch other devices. Hale's team began building a movement profile of the unknown phone, mapping weeks of tower data, watching the unnamed signal travel across the city like a ghost. And slowly, a pattern emerged. The unknown phone visited only 3 places: an apartment complex, a gas station, and a wooded stretch of road near the river. If they could narrow down the residences near the apartment site, they could isolate the owner. Still, it wasn't enough. They needed a breakthrough, something definitive. And that's when the gas station footage came in. At 12:33 a.m., minutes after Lily's phone went dark, the burner phone's owner entered the store. A hood obscured most of his face, but a distinctive tattoo curled up his neck. Hale recognized it instantly, a local ex-felon named Ryan Sutter, a man with a history of violence, stalking, and break-ins. Suddenly, everything clicked. The digital ghost had a human face, and everything Lily's phone had been whispering through its fading signal now pointed directly to him. Hale knew they were close, but he also knew men like Sutter. Corner them too fast, and they disappear. Move too slowly, and someone else gets hurt. The storm outside roared louder, as if the night itself could sense what was coming. The chase was about to begin, and Lily's phone, silent now, its battery long dead, had already told them the story without a sound. Detective Marcus Hale stood in the dim briefing room, watching the grainy gas station footage play out frame by frame on the projector. Rain hammered the roof above, as if the storm itself had followed the investigation indoors. "Pause," Hale instructed. The technician froze the screen at the exact moment the man looked up toward the camera. The hood still masked most of his face, but the faint spiral of ink climbing from the collar of his jacket was unmistakable. A serpent-shaped tattoo, one Hale had seen on mugshots, arrest reports, and parole records. "That's him," Hale murmured. Ryan Sutter, a man who lived like a shadow, drifting from job to job, apartment to apartment, the kind of predator who learned early in life that disappearing was easier than explaining. His history was a mosaic of red flags, domestic disputes, restraining orders, trespassing charges. Nothing big enough to put him away, but each one a warning flare in a long, dark pattern. But Hale knew better than to get ahead of himself. A tattoo was not evidence, and suspicion was not proof. The burner phone was the key, and the digital trail it left behind would become the backbone of their case if they could trace it accurately. "We need to map the device's entire movement history," Hale said. The digital forensics team nodded and returned to their desks, their screens glowing with rows of raw data, tower identifiers, timestamps, signal strength. It would take hours, maybe days, to parse, but the preliminary movements were already clear. The phone had been at the warehouse at the same moment Lily's phone connected to the unsecured router. It left the area minutes after her device went dark, and then it traveled to the gas station before going home. The pattern was too tight, too synchronized to be coincidence. Meanwhile, Hale sent 2 officers to quietly survey Sutter's neighborhood. The small apartment complex sat at the end of a narrow street, its faded paint and cracked walkways giving it a sense of neglect. The officers watched from an unmarked car and noted something immediately. Sutter didn't interact with anyone. No waves, no greetings, no neighbors knocking on his door. He moved in and out quickly, head down, always alone. That kind of behavior wasn't against the law, but detectives noticed such things. Predators often lived on the edges of their own communities, silently observed yet never engaged. Hale requested the building's security footage, but the manager shrugged and said the cameras had been broken for months. Convenient, but not unusual for low-income housing. Still, Hale felt an unease settling in his chest. Sutter was hiding something, and the darkness around him was beginning to take shape. Back at the station, the forensic team discovered another piece of data, something small, easy to overlook, but powerful once understood. At 11:57 p.m., roughly 5 minutes before Lily left the cafe, the burner phone connected briefly to a tower near the same street. That meant Sutter had been nearby before she even left the building. A worrying thought formed in Hale's mind. Was he watching her? Stalking cases often played out this way. Silent observation, following from a distance, waiting for the victim to be alone. Hale ordered an immediate re-review of every street camera near the cafe. Hours of footage were combed through until finally a chilling sequence emerged. At 11:49 p.m., 8 minutes before Lily stepped outside, a hooded figure appeared at the corner of the street, standing beneath a flickering lamppost. His posture slouched, his head turned toward the cafe windows. When Lily walked out, he moved, slowly at first, then with purpose, stalking her steps exactly, keeping a distance of roughly 40 feet. Camera after camera caught glimpses of him, never a clear face, always a silhouette drifting at the edges of the frame. This revelation changed the timeline entirely. Lily hadn't been randomly abducted, she had been hunted. The investigative team felt a shift in the air. Even the veteran officers sat straighter in their chairs, sensing the gravity of what they were uncovering. Hale ordered immediate coordination with the prosecution's office. He said, "We're building a probable cause stack. Every data point, every second of footage, every tower ping, we put it all in chronological order." He began speaking with the calm precision that defined him. The data was the spine of their case. The narrative was the tissue connecting it all. They had to show that Sutter was present, that he followed Lily, that he brought her to the warehouse, that he silenced her phone, and that he left alone. The prosecution needed a story built out of digital breadcrumbs, each one undeniable. At noon, the digital forensics team delivered one more surprise. The burner phone had connected to a small cluster of cell towers along the river road the past month. Not just once, but repeatedly, always after midnight, the same 2-mile stretch, always stopping for roughly 15 to 20 minutes before moving again. "That's a dump site pattern," Hale whispered. Serial offenders often return to the same isolated locations, sometimes for ritual, sometimes to dispose of evidence, sometimes simply because it felt safe. The river road was secluded, bordered by thick woods and no street lamps, and the timing, always late, always short stops, was classic behavior. Hale immediately dispatched officers to the area. They combed the roadside, scanning through underbrush and muddy patches, looking for signs of recent disturbance. After nearly an hour, one officer called out. Near a cluster of reeds beside the river, the ground had been disturbed. Not enough to indicate a grave, but enough to show something had been shoved or dragged through. The soil still seemed freshly overturned in places, despite last night's storm. Nearby, partially hidden in the mud, was something small and metallic, a charm, one that matched the bracelet she had been wearing when her sister last saw her. That was the moment hope officially drained from the investigation. Hale took the charm in his gloved hand, staring at it, feeling the weight of its meaning. He knew now they were no longer looking for a missing woman, but a murdered one, and the killer was out there, going about his morning as if nothing had happened. The river rustled softly beside them, the wind carrying the faint scent of wet earth and algae. Hale closed his eyes, listening to the water. Many killers returned to the place where they left their victims, not always to admire their crime, but to reassure themselves that the body remained hidden. The river road was now part of the story, a location etched into the killer's routine. This was their window. But the real power still lay in the digital trail. Back at the station, analysts continued constructing the burner phone's movement profile. They discovered that the burner phone had connected to the same Wi-Fi hotspot twice, once near the apartment complex and once at the gas station. A rookie analyst pointed out something incredible. The hotspot belonged to an old laptop registered to Sutter years ago. That meant the burner phone had been physically close enough to Sutter's device to attempt an auto connection, a digital handshake the suspect had never intended to reveal. "That's it," Hale said. "We have him tied to the burner." But he wasn't done. Hale wanted more. GPS metadata from public surveillance coals, environmental tower logs, neighbor routers that might have picked up stray signals. He ordered a geofence warrant allowing them to collect all device IDs that entered the warehouse radius at the time of Lily's abduction. Hours later, the results came in. Only 2 devices had been present, Lily's phone and the burner. The digital truth was becoming unavoidable. That night, Hale sat alone in his office. Rain pattered against the window glass, steady and relentless. He stared at the wall-sized evidence board in front of him, covered with maps, photos, timestamps, tower diagrams, and screenshots. Every line connected back to one man. Every breadcrumb pointed to the same shadow. He thought he was invisible, but his phone betrayed him. Still, Hale knew the most dangerous stage of the investigation was approaching. Arresting a predator too early gives them time to destroy evidence. Arresting them too late risks another life. He needed the moment to be perfect, and the moment was coming. He could feel it like electricity in the air before lightning strikes. What Hale didn't know, not yet, was that someone else had already begun to suspect the police were looking in Sutter's direction. Someone had warned him, and because of that, Sutter was already preparing to run. Detective Marcus Hale arrived at the precinct before dawn, the sky still bruised with remnants of the night storm. He barely slept. His mind replayed the digital patterns, the river road, the charm in the mud, and the ghost phone that moved in perfect sync with Lily's final steps. When he walked into the digital forensics lab, half the team was already there, coffee cups steaming beside screens filled with tower grids and signal logs. They had worked through the night. "We found something," the lead analyst announced, not even waiting for Hale to hang his coat. She pulled up a map layered with 3 different colors, each representing a different diagnostic data set. "This is the burner phone's route overlaid with Lily's," she explained. Hale leaned closer. The pattern was chilling. The burner's path shadowed Lily's phone from the moment she left the cafe until the moment her signal died. But that wasn't all. There were 2 points, 2 exact locations where both phones had paused at the same time for several minutes. One was the warehouse district, the other was a residential alley 3 blocks from the cafe. "He waited for her," Hale whispered. "He was lying in ambush before she even walked outside." This new information pushed the case into a dangerous accelerant. If the killer had been stalking Lily for longer than they realized, it meant he wasn't improvising. He was hunting. A man like that didn't just stop. He'd watched her, studied her patterns. She probably never noticed him. Predators who strike quietly often study their victims long before the attack, and the digital profile they were building reflected that precision. They found earlier evenings where Lily's phone and the burner were in the same radius for brief moments, 3 times in the previous month. Not enough to prove contact, but enough to show a pattern emerging in the shadows of her daily life. Hale stepped away from the screens, running a hand over his face. "We're looking at a serial behavior pattern," he said quietly to the team. A hush fell over the lab. No one wanted to say it, but everyone thought it. If Sutter had stalked Lily for weeks, could she have been his first victim? Or were there others they hadn't found yet? Hale refused to let his mind drift that far. Not now. The focus had to remain on the evidence. At 7:14 a.m., another data batch arrived from the cell carrier, this time containing something new: RTT logs, round-trip time measurements. These logs show the precise micro-delays between a phone and the tower, capable of narrowing a device's position to a range much smaller than typical tower triangulation. To most investigators, RTT logs were obscure, rarely used, difficult to interpret. But to Hale, they were gold. The team fed the RTT values through a mapping algorithm, and slowly a razor-thin digital thread appeared on the screen, tracking the burner phone down a single residential street on the night of the murder. One house in particular sat squarely in the path: Sutter's apartment. The dataset pinpointed the burner within 15 meters of his bedroom window at exactly 1:04 a.m., minutes after leaving the gas station. Hale stared at the map and felt a tightening sensation in his chest. This was no longer circumstantial coincidence. It was a digital confession. The phone lived where Sutter lived. It slept where he slept. It traveled only where he traveled, and on the night Lily died, it moved like an extension of his own shadow. Still, Hale needed one more thing, something irrefutably binding Sutter to the phone beyond location patterns, something prosecutors could stand on in court long after the case left his hands. A burner phone might have no name attached, but it still carried a unique IMEI number, a digital fingerprint burned into its circuitry. Hale requested a search warrant for phone store surveillance cameras across the city, hoping they could catch the moment Sutter bought the device. Hours later, one store responded. A man fitting Sutter's criteria, hood up, head angled away, had purchased a prepaid device 2 weeks prior. He paid in cash, said nothing, avoided eye contact, and left immediately. The clerk barely remembered him, but the timestamp matched perfectly. The IMEI matched the burner, and the man's posture, even partially obscured, matched Sutter's arrest photos. That was the moment Hale felt the noose tighten. He called his chief into the briefing room. "We have enough," Hale said. "Tower logs, RTT mapping, router handshake data, location overlap, historical stalking pattern, and now video evidence of him purchasing the burner." The chief hesitated. "Enough for an arrest?" Hale nodded. "Enough for an arrest, enough for a search warrant, and enough to find whatever he's hiding in that apartment." The chief agreed. The warrant request went through. But as Hale prepared the team for the takedown, something unexpected happened. An officer monitoring Sutter's apartment radioed in. "He's moving," the officer said, voice tight. Hale froze. "Moving how?" "Packing his car. Big duffel bag. He's looking around constantly." Hale's heart dropped into his stomach. Someone warned him. "We need to go now," Hale said. He grabbed his jacket and sprinted toward the parking garage. Every second mattered now. If Sutter disappeared, they might never find Lily's remains, and if the river road was a dump site, the evidence could still be out there, vulnerable to time, weather, and scavengers. The police caravan roared through the wet streets, sirens silent but lights flashing. They approached the apartment complex with precision, surrounding exits, blocking side streets. Hale led the entry team. They reached Sutter's front door at the exact moment he stepped outside with the duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Their eyes met. For a second, time froze. The man's face was calm, too calm. Predators often wore masks of stillness in moments of panic. Hale raised his weapon. "Ryan Sutter, police. Drop the bag and get on the ground." For the first time, Sutter's expression cracked. His eyes darted sideways, calculating escape. He turned, bolting towards the alley. Hale chased him through puddles, the rain soaking into his clothes as he sprinted forward. Sutter was fast, lean, desperate, slippery in the narrow space between buildings. But data analysts knew something that Sutter didn't. His movements were predictable, and Hale had been studying those patterns all night. Sutter veered right at the dumpster, exactly as his geolocated habits suggested he would. Hale anticipated it, cut the angle, and tackled him to the soaked pavement. The arrest was quick, brutal, efficient. The duffel bag was seized immediately. Inside were clothes, a passport, cash bundles, a folding knife, and something else, something wrapped in a black trash bag. When the officer unfolded the plastic, the room fell silent. It was Lily's phone, smashed, battery removed, screen shattered. But even a destroyed phone still whispered digital truths. Forensic experts could extract logs, combine them with cloud backups, rebuild fragments of past movements. Sutter had been trying to flee with the one object that connected him to the crime, and in doing so, he had confirmed his guilt. Back at the station, Hale stared at the phone inside the evidence bag. Rain slid down his face, dripping into his collar. He felt a surge of anger, not loud, not explosive, but cold and heavy, the kind of anger detectives learned to hold deep inside so it didn't burn through their discipline. "We have him," Hale said softly, almost to himself. "But this isn't over. We still need to find her." Because data could lead them to the killer, but only the truth could bring Lily home. The next phase of the investigation was about to begin, one that would require digging deeper into the digital shadows Sutter had left behind, and the greatest clue was still out there, pulsing quietly through the ether, waiting to be found. The interrogation room was cold enough to feel like punishment, a square metal box humming under fluorescent lights that buzzed with a faint, irritating tremor. Ryan Sutter sat at the table in handcuffs, dripping rainwater onto the floor. He looked smaller now, shrunken inside himself, eyes darting around as if searching for exits that didn't exist. Detective Marcus Hale entered the room with slow, deliberate steps. He placed a single folder on the table, thin but sharp as a blade. "You ran," Hale said, lowering himself into the chair. "People don't run unless they're guilty or scared." Sutter smirked, revealing a crack in his calm facade. "You got nothing," he muttered. "It's just a phone." Hale leaned forward. "It's more than a phone," he said quietly. "It's your entire map of the night, and it's going to bury you." Sutter's eyes flickered. Not fear, not yet, but uncertainty, the first fracture. Outside the room, the digital forensics team prepared for the next phase, pulling the final breadcrumb from Lily's devices. They began extracting crash logs, Wi-Fi probe requests, GPS residuals, Bluetooth handshakes, and the tiny digital artifacts most criminals never even consider. A phone, even smashed, remembers things. Microscopic traces of its last moments cling to its memory like fingerprints. Hale knew this. Sutter didn't. As the interrogation continued, the lab's monitors filled with cascading code, timestamps, tower identifiers. The analysts were resurrecting Lily's final digital heartbeat. Hale placed a map in front of Sutter, a simple city layout with two lines, one red, one blue, running parallel in a chilling dance. "Red is Lily," Hale said. "Blue is you." Sutter didn't look at it. He stared at the wall, jaw clenched. Hale tilted the map slightly, forcing his eyes downward. "You followed her," Hale said. "Right after she left the cafe. You were waiting." Sutter scoffed. "Coincidence." Hale shook his head slowly. "There's no such thing in tower data, not when the same two phones overlap repeatedly for a month." That made Sutter blink, just once, a tiny involuntary motion, but Hale saw it. The detective continued, his voice calm, steady, almost soothing in its precision. "You bought a burner phone, paid in cash, kept it off until you needed it. Smart, but not smart enough. You didn't know the tower's log RTT data. You didn't know routers you walk past can handshake with your device even if you don't connect. You didn't know that when Lily's phone stopped breathing, yours was the last signal next to it. Hale paused. You didn't know that phones scream the truth even when they're silent. Sutter shifted uncomfortably, his knuckles whitened around the cuffs. Meanwhile, in the forensic lab, an analyst called out, "We got GPS drift points." Everyone crowded around the monitor. Embedded deep within the corrupted memory of Lily's phone were 3 partial location packets, GPS lock attempts, faint but present, not enough to give a full coordinate, but enough to create a rough directional vector. They pointed away from the warehouse, toward the river, toward the woods, toward the place where predators hide things they don't want found. Hale's phone buzzed. He read the message without changing expression, only whispering, "Keep going." Back in the interrogation room, Hale changed tactics. He slid a photograph across the table, the charm found in the mud near the river. Sutter's jaw tightened. "This was hers," Hale said, "dropped while you were disposing of evidence, maybe more." Sutter breathed harder now, short and controlled breaths. "I don't know what that is." "You should," Hale said. "You were at the River Road multiple times this month, between midnight and 1 a.m. Same path, same stop, same duration. You made it part of your routine." Sutter shook his head. "You can't know that." Hale leaned closer. "We do, because your phone told us." The first crack appeared. Sutter's leg bounced uncontrollably, thigh trembling under the table. Everybody's phone leaves patterns, where you sleep, where you work, where you hide. Hale's voice lowered to almost a whisper, "where you dump bodies." That hit Sutter like a physical blow. His head snapped upward for a fraction of a second before he forced them back to dead stillness, a mask slipping. Hale had him. Suddenly, the door opened. The lead analyst stepped inside and handed Hale a printed sheet, fresh as a confession. Hale read it once. His expression never changed, but a subtle tension drained from his shoulders. He placed the paper on the table between them. "Your phone connected to a tower near the river at 1:42 a.m. 2 nights ago." Sutter swallowed. "So?" Hale tapped the page, and at that exact minute, a second handshake occurred. Sutter's forehead creased involuntarily. "A second device?" he asked before he could stop himself. Hale smiled softly, almost sadly. "Yes, Lily's phone." Silence filled the room, heavy, absolute. Sutter stared at the sheet, his breath growing shallow. "Impossible," he whispered. Hale shook his head. "Phones don't lie, even dead ones, even smashed ones. She was there, with you, the night she vanished." Sutter's mouth opened as if to speak, but nothing came out. The truth hung in the air like a suffocating fog. Hale leaned forward again, his voice dropping into a low, relentless cadence. "Ryan, you didn't know her phone was still trying to connect, even without a signal. You didn't know it was broadcasting tiny probe requests. You didn't know those were picked up by a tower just long enough to log her last location." Hale paused. "You didn't know that phones scream the truth even when they're silent." Sutter's composure broke. A single tear, unintentional, escaped down his cheek. He turned his face away, but Hale saw the fracture split wide. "You don't understand," Sutter whispered, voice cracking. "It wasn't supposed to—" He stopped himself, clamped his teeth down hard. Hale seized the moment. "Then help us," he said. "Tell me where she is." Sutter's shoulders shook, not sobbing, but trembling with pressure, anxiety, and the collapse of whatever story he had prepared. He said nothing, but his silence was the loudest admission Hale has heard. Hale stood. "We're done for now." As he reached the door, he paused. "Ryan, the data will speak even if you don't, and it already has." He left the room, leaving Sutter alone with his unraveling world. Outside, Hale joined the forensic team as they transferred the partial GPS vectors into mapping software. The lines extended like thin arrows across the city. When combined with tower triangulation and the RTT logs from the night Sutter returned to the River Road, the vectors intersected in a single region. a dense patch of woods near the old railroad tracks, a place with no lights, no cameras, no witnesses. Hale felt a chill crawl along his spine. "Gear up," he ordered. "We're going out there." Before they left, the chief asked, "You think she's still there?" Hale looked at the map, the darkness around the coordinates, the weight of the digital story telling its final chapter. "If he didn't move her," Hale said quietly, "that's where we'll find the truth." The search team prepared for the dense forest terrain, flashlights cutting through the fog as they loaded equipment. The air outside tasted like metal and rain. Without a word, Hale stepped into the night, following the silent signals of a phone that had tried to speak even in death. The courtroom was packed in that uneasy way murder trials always are, like a church filled with believers who are afraid to hear what their God might say. Every bench held people leaning forward, elbows on knees, breaths shallow, waiting for the final piece of a puzzle they had all tried to solve themselves. At the center of it all stood the accused, Brendan Harker, thin, pale, eyes hollow like someone who hadn't slept since the day the police knocked on his door. He didn't blink much. The reporter said that was because guilt lived behind his eyelids. His lawyer claimed it was anxiety. The truth? Well, the truth waited behind the next 45 minutes of testimony. Detective Rowan Caldwell stepped onto the stand like a man walking into a storm he'd already survived once. His notes were tucked neatly beneath his arm, his badge glinting under the lights. He had investigated dozens of murders, hundreds of disappearances, and thousands of lies, but this case had worn him down in ways even he couldn't fully articulate. It wasn't just the brutality of Emily Warren's final night, it was the silence that surrounded it. No witnesses, no weapon, no confession, just digital footprints left like invisible fingerprints on a glass world. And tonight, finally, he had to prove to 12 strangers that those footprints were enough. The prosecutor approached the stand with the confidence of a man holding a checkmate hidden behind his back. "Detective Caldwell," he began slowly, "please explain to the jury how you placed the defendant at the scene of the murder." Caldwell nodded. He didn't need his notes for this part. It was etched into him. "We used his cell phone," he said, letting the words sink in like a stone falling into deep water. Or rather, the story that his cell phone told. A murmur rolled through the courtroom. They all knew the basics, of course. Every headline had said the same thing. Cell phone data traps local man in homicide investigation. But none of them understood the detail, the precision, or the chilling simplicity of how it unfolded. Caldwell continued, "Cell phones are always searching, always reaching out, even when you think they're quiet. They're connecting to towers, checking signals, leaving digital handprints everywhere they go. Mr. Harker claimed he was asleep at home the night of Emily Warren's murder, but his phone tells a very different story." The prosecutor clicked a remote and the screen behind the detective lit up with a map, darkened except for 3 glowing dots, 3 towers, 3 silent witnesses. Tower 1, 8:43 p.m., Tower 2, 9:02 p.m., Tower 3, 9:16 p.m. Each dot pulsed like a heartbeat. Caldwell pointed. At 9:02 p.m., Mr. Harker's phone connected to Tower 2, which covers the corridor leading to the old service road, the same road where Emily was last seen alive. Defense counsel jumped up, objecting loudly. Cell towers do not give exact locations. And for a moment, the room boiled with tension, but the judge, calm as a winter wind, overruled him. "Continue, detective." So Caldwell did. Cell towers give us a radius, a possible area, but when we combined the tower data with the phone's accelerometer readings, the pattern changed. The phone wasn't stationary. It was moving, steady, 4 miles per hour, the pace of someone walking fast or someone forcing another person to walk. A woman in the back row covered her mouth in horror. Caldwell said nothing for a moment. The truth needed space when it was this heavy. He continued, At 9:16 p.m., the phone hit Tower 3. Tower 3 is small, microcell coverage, only a few blocks, including the abandoned drainage tunnel where Emily's body was found. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even Harker didn't blink. Then the prosecutor brought out the real turning point, a single sheet of paper, a record from the defendant's phone provider. "Detective, can you explain what this timestamp means?" Caldwell took a breath. At 9:17 p.m., 1 minute after connecting to Tower 3, Mr. Harker's phone pinged again, this time not to a tower, but to Emily Warren's phone, an outgoing Bluetooth handshake, a device searching for another device it had recently paired with. A man in the jury widened his eyes. Another leaned back as if physically hit. The prosecutor stepped closer. "Detective Caldwell," the prosecutor said slowly, "why would his phone be searching for her phone?" Caldwell didn't soften the answer. Because they were in close physical proximity, less than 10 meters. You have to be practically right next to someone for that handshake to fire. The courtroom rippled with shock. But the defense fought back, of course. They tried to argue that Bluetooth could glitch, that cell towers were imperfect, that data could mislead. But one by one, Caldwell dismantled their claims with the patience of a man who had spent 3 months living inside the digital skeleton of this case. And then came the final blow. "Detective Caldwell," the prosecutor said, "please explain the significance of the step count data captured between 9:14 and 9:18 p.m. Caldwell lifted the defendant's phone from the evidence tray. Mr. Harker claimed he was asleep at home, but according to his device, during that 4-minute window, the phone recorded 482 steps, nearly exactly the distance between Tower 3 picked him up and the drainage tunnel entrance. The jury stared at him as if the truth were something radioactive. But the real moment, the moment everything hinged on, was the voicemail, the one Emily never meant to send. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, "the state moves to introduce the recovered audio file." The judge allowed it. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the audio file played, crackled, then steadied. There was wind, a scuffling sound, Emily's breath, uneven, frightened, a man's voice saying, "Keep walking," and then faintly, almost too faint to hear, a notification sound from a phone. Caldwell spoke softly. That notification is the same tone as Mr. Harker's phone, time-stamped within 30 seconds of the Tower 3 connection. When the audio ended, not a single person looked at the defendant the same way again. The verdict took just under 2 hours. Guilty. Caldwell didn't celebrate. He never did. Outside the courthouse, the evening sky hung low and gray like a curtain that refused to rise. Reporters swarmed, families murmured, and flashes from cameras cut across the gloom like lightning. But Caldwell walked alone toward his car, the weight of justice pressing down on him in familiar, exhausting ways. He had solved the case, yes. He had given Emily's family an answer, yes. But answers didn't bring someone back. Answers didn't heal the way people believed they would. Answers were just the final chapter before another tragedy started somewhere else. Before driving off, he looked at his own phone sitting silently in the passenger seat, a device that knew where he had been, where he was going, what he feared, what he avoided, what he searched late at night when guilt and memory took turns crawling up his spine. He wondered how many truths lived inside that little screen, how many lies, how many futures waiting to be decrypted, how many mysteries waiting to be solved. He turned the key, the engine hummed, and somewhere in the darkening city, another phone lit up quietly, recording its own secrets, footsteps, connections, heartbeats, waiting for someone like Caldwell to one day follow the signals into the abyss. Because in a world made of towers and data trails, every crime left a shadow, and every shadow eventually found the light.